to be an astronaut? Well, that's great. You can be an astronaut. All you have to do is study flying or science, and maybe someday you could be the first astronaut to walk on the moon.
No! There already was an astronaut who first walked on the moon.
Well, no, not really. That wasn't real. See, there was this thing called the Cold War, and in order to beat the Russians, we kind of faked that. That never happened. See how there's no windows on the side? And see underneath where there's like a pod thing? What's that, right? Take a look at this wreckage. See how there's no plane parts on the ground there? What does that look like?
A missile.
I'm interested, before we start the intro, Hot Water History episode 160, Rich Hyde, how open are you with the kids, raising them about maybe stuff that you don't fully believe, but something that you could be swayed on? My point is, there are conspiracy theories that are layups, and then there's conspiracy theories that are half-court shots. How deep do you go with, I was thinking about this as I was watching this, how deep do you shoot with the kids?
I'm more than willing to take full court shots.
Okay. All
Yeah.
right.
As long as I can explain that there are conclusions that are met, at least the official narrative has holes in it. That's where I might start with a full court shot and then work our way out from that, hopefully leading to them to conclude that they should ultimately have a deep suspicion and ultimately a cynicism toward the official narrative.
Right.
Yeah, because remember, all of those layups the ball started at full court. And the more that we can look back, either through plumbing historical evidence and doing good research, or the stuff that's revealed that we always suspected to be true, it's more and more clear that, well, the conspiracy theorists are right more often than not.
Right. Especially this decade.
Yeah.
This century.
Now, that being said, there is something that I found that I can only characterize as innate within discerning and critical thinkers, that the conspiracy theories that I think are kind of limited hangouts that would invalidate other thoughts or assertions to wreck the official narrative because they're so absurd, there's an innate quality among people who are really discerning thinkers to say that's pretty ridiculous on the more outlandish. And I'm not speaking, maybe that's not the word, outlandish, ridiculous, absurd. In the case, for example, you might remember in my episode with James Dellingpole, God bless James out in England, but he said, there are conspiracy theorists that say that the Civil War in the United States didn't even take place. And that's one where I was actually pondering this in the car the other day. I don't know where these thoughts come from as I'm driving on the various highways and byways here around Chicago, but in and around Chicago. But that was the one that stuck with me, and I'm thinking, to what end? And it's not as though if we say the cabal wanted a message to come from the Civil War and that it was to be faked. Well, what was the message? I mean, if you do a really investigative and critical look at the Civil War, one would only have to conclude that the South was largely right, the North was nationalistic and murderously so, and Lincoln was a killer, and Jefferson Davis had and as well as many of the Southern thinkers, not just military generals like Jackson and others and Lee, but the real statesmen of the time, such as Stevens and before him, although he was dead by this time, Calhoun, who represented the states' rights argument that would turn in the main purpose or causus belli for the war for the South. I mean, you're able to conclude that. So the message failed in a sense. I suppose it does still hold captive the vast majority of Americans, but I guess if you're going to run a conspiracy like that, you'd have to do a better job,
Right.
would be my take.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to talk about conspiracies
Hmm.
for the whole episode because we got a lot to talk about,
Yeah.
especially a topic that we mention a lot
Hmm.
in this great book, A Twisted History of the United States, tariffs.
Yes.
Because they have a huge impact on not only our lives, but the economy, and that hasn't changed. That money makes the world go round. That
You
doesn't.
mean you mean Charlie, we're going to assert or you're going to uncover that we in the book assert that tariffs are not some panacea to all things that provide ill to an economy?
Correct.
Hmm.
Correct. It's actually there's actually a lot of not so great. It's not the medicine for this
It's no ivermectin.
this banana republic economy that we've become accustomed to.
Yes, in point of fact,
Post COVID inflation
hmm
economy that just is fake. We have a fake economy right now.
yeah, developing and as well as developed economies, in fact, one of the surest ways to ensure that even advanced economies fall into the banana republic status and go back to becoming second or third world nations is through economic sanctions or economic policies that would be described as restrictive, protective, and the like, contrary to the free market, antithetical to it in its operation. And then uh, tariffs take, it's amazing. It was Murray Rothbard who said that if you were just to take the policies and just line up what tariffs amount to regarding taxation and in the inhibition of economic growth, vitality, innovation that results, they are indistinguishable from sanctions that a foreign power would place upon an adversary if it had the wherewithal or authority or military might to do so.
I have one of my favorite segments of the book actually pulled up is the Massachusetts versus Connecticut
Mm,
example on tariffs. Do you want me to read it?
yeah, go ahead. I mean, so the notion that tariffs are some sort of new economic phenomenon or novel theory, even in American history, in the American historical context, is really off. So,
Right. This is a section from the colonial era, independence, and constitutional period, 1550
so
to 1789.
So let's just take stock of where we're at. Trump's going to have us saying that of all people, Alexander Hamilton was right in this on this particular issue, specific issue.
Tariffs resemble a magic wand. You're not, in a direct and obligatory way, taxing your own people. Good. You're raising revenue only when they purchase outside, i.e., foreign goods, and you are incentivizing domestic production. How so? Say that a dozen eggs cost one Massachusetts Spanish dollar, as weird as that sounds. If the Massachusetts legislature passed a 15% tariff on Connecticut eggs, then the price of buying Connecticut eggs would be 1.15 MSD, Massachusetts Spanish dollars, after the tax is assessed. Hence, people in Massachusetts are incentivized to purchase eggs from Massachusetts chickens and their owners. Great. All that money stays in Massachusetts, and none leaks to the benefit of dirty, inferior Connecticut citizens. Sorry, people from Connecticut, no insult intended. This is for dramatic effect. Here are the problems, though. The Massachusetts egg producers are then incentivized to raise their prices to a level just below the artificial price increase created by the tariff. I call it the Fenwick, let's just be slightly better than O pure F principle.
Sure. You still get a
Even
cost, you still get the price advantage, though.
even if they increase it to something like 1.10 per dozen eggs, the general price of eggs increases well beyond the market level price. In addition, because tariffs naturally pick winners and losers, tariffs are protectionist. They award, in this case, Massachusetts egg producers all due deference to the hens and punish everyone else. Not just Connecticut eggers, but everyone in Massachusetts who purchases eggs. Not only the guy who likes a couple over easy for breakfast, but also restaurants, eggnog makers, and other producers who use eggs and any byproduct of eggs. Do eggs have byproducts? Not sure. Can the shell be used for anything? Just one more thing, too. One might retort to all this, like every protectionist, that the higher price of eggs would increase incentive. This part's so important that the higher price of eggs would increase incentive and profit for more Massachusettsans. Is that how you say it?
Mm-hmm.
Massachusettsans
Mm-hmm.
producing more eggs. Would not that competition create an immense market for domestic egg producers and with it attendant competition? The answer, in short, or more so in long, is no. While there might be more competition in the egg market, that means that valuable resources from other productive areas would be diverted to egg production, wherein there was never a natural market force demanding more eggs.
Mm-hmm.
This is what classical liberal economists like the aforementioned Adam Smith and later Austrian school economists called malinvestment. In essence, no one benefits long term from government manipulation of prices in the economy. Pretty
Nice little
good.
summation.
Pretty
Yeah,
good.
pretty dang good.
250 years ago and
Right.
still hanging up.
Yeah, economic laws don't fade away. And this one is as rock solid and tested in time as any law, really. That is, again, that you just have to apply Henry Hazlitt's, when we're talking about tariff, Henry Hazlitt's constant mantra of economics being a science by which you have to investigate the seen and the unseen. Just because you might be able to, as a government, raise revenues in a myopic sense, um, for a very small amount of time, very short amount of time, excuse me, through the imposition of tariffs, and thus engage in what ultimately results in trade wars. It's not too hyperbolic to say that nations they just don't sit around while you level tariffs upon their exports and say, "Oh well," yeah. But they do enact trade war. But the consequences to the domestic economy are much greater than the fact that foreign markets all of a sudden close to exports, American exports in this case. It's as you said within our passage, namely that it causes economic disruptions and mutations that have long lasting, often unseen effects until oftentimes, perhaps years, even decades later, wherein, as you said, for example, just taking part of the argument, you have this rapid increase. Why do manufacturers, let's just say beyond egg producers, let's use steel producers. Why do steel producers that love protective tariffs in the domestic sphere? Because again, and people readily admitted this at the time, when nationalists like Joseph Story or Alexander Hamilton before him, or later Abraham Lincoln or William McKinley, whom Trump has some sort of weird man crush on, when they argued for the various tariffs to be imposed, it was because of not just revenue coming in to the government so that the government might facilitate, well, a number of different expenditures, including foreign adventurism by the time of McKinley, but also, well, and even what might call domestic adventurism in the time of Lincoln. So it's not just the revenue part, it's that it indeed is a boon to the supposed producers because they can, again, raise the price in an artificial way, not necessarily because of a problem of scarcity, nor of because of improvement in the product that they're making and the expense and, for example, research and development and expenditure that they use to produce it, but rather just through the artificial means because they're able to raise the price just shy of the cost of the foreign competitor good. And this in turn raises, as we briefly stated in the book there, it in turn raises prices for all those who would use, in this case, steel. So this hurts indeed even the domestic manufacturers who are adjacent to the steel industry. So what happens when the cost artificially rise for steel? It's not a benefit. Well, it's only a benefit to the purely steel producers, but to those who are manufacturing skyscrapers, those who are using steel to build homes, whatever steel is being used for, railways, for example. Well, of course, the prices go up for them. So there's no such thing as a purely foreign tariff. The tariff costs are disseminated and spread, not just in the foreign venues and markets, but also are felt in the domestic markets.
And there's not nearly enough incentive to maintain high quality also.
Well, yes, there's a weird kind of curve there, if we can imagine it, wherein there is at the tail end of the one of the effects or externalities of tariffs, wherein you would have a competitive market reestablished, especially because as the prices artificially rise, yes, there would be an attractant to manufacturers to go into, let's say, the steel industry. Yes. So as there would be a kind of glut of people trying to, well, benefit from the increase in prices, there would be entrepreneurs that would be competitive. However, again, this causes a malformation and malinvestment in the macro or greater economy because one, you're pulling away resources that would otherwise be deployed in natural endeavors that are much more in keeping with actual market demand. So that's one. And then two, the expertise factor. Like all these people coming in to, let's say this in this case that we're using, the steel industry, don't have the same expertise as a Carnegie or a Krupp in Germany or Nippon Steel in Japan, correct? So eventually there's going to be through let's just stipulate some venture capital going into entrepreneur or supporting entrepreneurs in the steel industry. Well, that's going to be lost. And with that, the all the opportunity costs that would have come with diverting that capital or employing that capital.
Oh, so it's actually more, it's like the illusion, is it the illusion of competition, essentially?
Yeah, right. Or for a time, actual competition. But remember, not all when we use that word competition, we tend to use it at only as a a benefit, as
Right,
though all competition is good.
right.
No, that's not necessarily true. Mises and Bombauer and others would say, look, if you have artificial competition that's brought about by mm, an an imagined market demand, correct? So
Hmm.
remember how prices are so central and key to Mises because they're the only real indicator of true market demand by which producers and entrepreneurs can then measure what they can gain through an enterprise or entering into a field.
Got it. So the rookie entrepreneur thinks he has a way better shot at making it
Correct.
big in an industry compared to what they actually have.
Correct. I mean, think about, for example, let's use a different analogy. Let's use baseball cards, for example. And all of a sudden, the price of baseball cards goes
Oh,
up. Do you mind
yeah.
if we use this one?
I don't know. I might get personally hurt here.
Oh,
But
oh, why did your mom throw away like
no,
a Ken Griffey rookie card or something?
so this is actually really interesting that you bring this up because
Mm.
this was really just, and we could honestly do a whole episode on this, I think, because it's absolutely underreported about really the rug pull that sports cards were during
Yes.
COVID, during the
Right.
COVID boom. And
Okay. Yes.
that was really one of my first businesses actually, is
Mm.
I collected all these sports cards. It was basically, if you looked at sports cards and buying crypto, you could have done the same thing. It was a really similar path.
Yes.
And I don't want to talk too long, but eBay, essentially, when you go on sold items, so if you sold an item, but the transaction wasn't completed, right? So
Mm.
if I post a Ken Griffey Jr. rookie card and somebody buys it, but the
Yeah.
payment isn't completed, it's still listed on it was still listed on eBay's sold items.
Mm.
So what what an entrepreneur or anyone that's into the hobby would do is you go first to sold items to see the market because you could see, oh, a Ken Griffey Jr. card yesterday
Ah.
sold for $100. Oh, last week it sold for 90. The week before that it was 80. So there's a trending upwards, Ken Griffey.
Mhm.
But a, there's a lot of bad actors out there that could overinflate the market just by buying and pulling the payment before it transacts.
Wow. Yes. Okay.
So
So
the entire sports card industry, and I'm going along here, but the entire sports card industry after COVID was really just a mix of inflation and eBay refusing to fix a bug that they knew it had, and
mm.
really PayPal too, in that sense.
Yeah, that sounds like a futures and forward market where people don't actually close the deal. Like they don't fulfill their obligations.
Right. But imagine
Mm.
that, but imagine the entire market is using that
Uh,
price almost as a stock
hmm.
price for that
Yes.
card.
Right. But it's not an accurate stock price. It's not an
No,
accurate. It's
no.
no, it's a an illusory rather than subjective valuation.
Right. So you get rug pulled, which I did. I got back to even, but with some inventory, it's still here. But yeah, that was a crazy business experience. I can't believe I didn't think we were going to talk about that today, but I don't even. So you
So
were
sorry
talking
to hit
about
the
sports
sore
cards. Yeah,
spot.
yeah. Honestly, that felt like a dark memory. Felt like a therapy session when you
Was it?
like, yeah.
Did you feel better? Was
I
that
was getting
cathartic
flashbacks.
or?
It actually was very cathartic. I don't, because you don't know that never comes up, right? You never get
Mm.
to that point in real life. Like, hey, do you have a sports card market? Like, yeah, long story, but
So just imagine without all of that background, if we just
yes.
let's
Sorry
tabula
about that.
rasa,
Sorry about
and
that.
Still recovering and healing from that.
Hmm.
But if you had a market where all of a sudden baseball cards started, like, for example, during COVID, but let's go back to when, for example, I was a kid and all of a sudden all these baseball card companies started to emerge. It wasn't just Tops anymore. It was Upper Deck and there was Fleer and all of these baseball card companies entering into the market because the cards themselves were being, again, subjectively valued. And this is part of the marginal revolution that Menger and Bombauer and Mises so well led the charge of in the whole sphere and revolutionized economics. And that look, the actual cost that went into manufacturing the card, even paying MLB and the player for their name, image, and likeness back then was small and relatively tiny, especially when you mass produce the cards and you're bringing in all this revenue from the purchase of them. It's relatively small. So it's the subjective value. Of course, baseball cards are a great example of how people determine the valuation. We, in operation of the transactions, the trillions of transactions that go on, allow for a price to be established over a thing. Because the card doesn't take that much to manufacture, but all of a sudden, and you know the differentiation, the in fact the cost of manufacturing a Ken Griffey Jr. card and a Billy Ripken card, not the Air one that costs so much money, but a Billy Ripken card are essentially the same. And yet, if you had a Ken Griffey Jr. rookie card and a Billy Ripken rookie card, you know that the value is much different because of the total subjective valuation of it, and that's only determined by the price. So, but if you had all of these people rushing in, and let's say all of a sudden, by some means, there's let's think of it this way. Tops, Fleer, and Upper Deck all conspire to burn or destroy all of their Ken Griffey Jr. cards, except for the ones that have already been put out and purchased by the public. You see?
Right.
Well, then you would have a glut of maybe even more manufacturers making Ken Griffey Jr. cards. In other words, they're artificially manipulating the market. And in doing so, you're going to get this attractant. It's sort of kind of, what would we call it? Bugs to the bug zapper, or a fly to, or a moth to light. So all the moths are going to come in and try to, well, noting that there's this scarcity of Ken Griffey Jr. cards, well, why don't we make our own? And then they enter in the business. But so there's kind of a high point there where there would be competition. But do they bring with them the expertise of Topps, Fleer, and Upper Deck? Do they have the means of production to make the cards? Do they have the contracts with MLB to simply take the image and likeness? Will they face lawsuits? Do they have a legal team if they should face lawsuits? All of the things that go into, in a sense, baseball card manufacturing, having some representative or ear on the back then, who was the commissioner of baseball, Fay Vincent, maybe. Oh, by the way, he just passed away. But anyway, so they don't have that, let's call it infrastructure. So there would be competition, but notice that because of the artificial manipulation of the market on the part of Topps and Fleer and Upper Deck, that you have this attractant, and then therefore all resources that would have otherwise been expended in a wise fashion, if there was a natural evolution within the market without the conspiring or the cabal of the three card manufacturers, well, that's where you wouldn't have malinvestment, and you wouldn't have those businesses fail.
Right. Because that's such a waste. The business failing is a waste.
Precisely. Right. And furthermore, in that malinvestment environment where there's speculation going on as to how much could be reaped in profit from these enterprises, well, you have not just the expenditure of what could have been, but the time cost. All of those things that mount into those elements are, well, taken away from individuals operating within what would otherwise be a free economy.
Right.
So all these market manipulations and interventions, again, always redound negatively to the consumer, yeah, and to those who. Oh, the point I was going to make about when you have those moths flying to the light, yeah, is that oh, and it just escaped my mind because I was thinking of the moths. Oh, yes, people become more and more risk tolerant, unworthily so, right? In other words, there's a rationale to become risk tolerant because well, if capital's flowing because the central bank is keeping interest rates artificially low, yet another intervention, a very powerful one, by the way, if that's what's happening, well, they're all going to be more and more willing to fly closer to the light. And unfortunately, as an entrepreneur, that's what you're always trying to assess, risk versus the reward in terms of profit after you have all of this expenditure, whether it's time or treasure, toward the enterprise. And when you have market manipulations, there's no one that can do those things. It's the same thing with, for example, if you're unaware as a corporation of tax uncertainty, right? And this is what tariffs do too. It's like, what are companies doing now as Trump's throwing out all these tariff possibilities. Well, they don't know how much should they allocate to inventory. What should they be doing? Should they start domestic manufacturing? Should they, for example, seek out trade deals with favored nations? Let's have manufacturing move from China to Taiwan or China to Vietnam or something along those lines. So they're stuck in this place of inertia, and
Mhm.
inertia allows for, well, a loss oftentimes, especially if you're in a dynamic sector of the economy. As a producer, as a raw materials company, whatever enterprise you're engaged in. And as a final note too, it pains me, and I'm sure it sticks a little bit in your craw, if I could use that phrase, that of all the presidents that Trump could have said he's going to emulate in terms of his economic policy, of all the Gilded Age presidents, he chose McKinley and Benjamin Harrison, although he didn't say Benjamin Harrison, but the policies are the same, instead of our man Grover Cleveland. Because what Cleveland recognized in during doing his heroic turnabout on the tariff, he was once pro-tariff and then very vociferously against the tariff, was that the bubbling of wealth that was generated. Trump is right. The greatest boom of any nation in economic history is the United States during the Gilded Age from 1868 to 1910 or thereabouts. And it wasn't because of the tariffs. The tariffs were these mutations that held economic progress and prosperity down, as much as McKinley and others would argue that they didn't. Mark Hanna in Ohio and all these manufacturers. Of course, they themselves benefiting from the protectionist policies and interventions. However, it was Cleveland who boldly, and it cost him the presidency in 1888 as he tried to run again. And plus, Trump could have said, look at Grover Cleveland, we're the only ones that we had two non-consecutive terms. And look at this guy, he's a genius. He attributed the real cause of that was that the government was minuscule in terms of cost, expenditure, activity, intervention. It was so tiny, and Cleveland made it even more. It strangled it even more during his tenure. And this is what it was these presidents and these Congresses who were so pro free market and so in favor of free enterprise that brought about the prosperity of the age, not tariffs on foreign goods and manufacturers or raw materials.
I love it. Anything else on tariffs?
No, we could transition into something that the Trump administration and his sergeant at arms, it seems, Elon Musk is doing to really, well, reduce the size of that government as much as it is a behemoth. It's like, taking out the lifts in its shoes, but still, gotta start somewhere.
USAID?
Yes, USAID. Before we even get into discussion as to what's going on and what our thoughts are of it, I just thought I'd run down a list of already confirmed expenses identified by Doge and Musk's team. By the way, one of the guys there, the Farrader kid, is just amazing. We should have a. Have you bumped into this kid?
No.
So I forget his first name. Forgive me, Farrader, because you really deserve to be mentioned and honored. So this kid Farrader, he started the Vesuvius project. Have you heard about this? You haven't heard
Mm,
about this?
no.
So this is one of the 22-year-old whiz kids that Musk is employing in Doge to uncover all this malfeasance in government. And you have all these Democratic senators like Chris Murphy of Connecticut yelling, "Get these dirty 22-year-olds back to school." You know what? At least they're doing something productive of which you have done nothing in your entire life, Chris Murphy.
That's a really fun job.
Such a
Doge?
yeah, yeah. Could you imagine? So, what is the Vesuvius Project? And you can check this out, and I'll put a link in the show notes. When when Vesuvius erupted, and consume Pompeii. There were discovered later on, of course, all the cavities that were of bodies that were buried in the rubble and the ash and from the cataclysmic eruption. But archaeologists have often also found these burnt scrolls. They're really large scrolls of paper that where they were suspected, we would suspect there was something written on them, but they were burned. And so they look kind of like these ashen balls. And when you peel through them, there's about 150, 160 of them. And you peel through them and you can't see anything because it's just a mess of dirt and ash and coal and burnt residue. Well, this kid who he admits, he goes, I studied Latin. I wasn't too great at it, but I always think about the Roman Empire. So he joined the Vesuvius Project and he was a techie. He said, what could I deploy some AI and some algorithms to, in this large language model experiment, piece through and through the various layers, determine if there's any writing in there that's to the naked eye unseen. And furthermore, when the scrolls burned, they're rolled up. So when it burned, all the papers kind of came together or melded together. So they have to go through all these different layers well, sure enough, he deployed this enormous amount of computing power with the Vesuvius Project and these other guys that were working on the same thing. And they're deciphering what's going through. They found it. They found letters. They put together the words. And the first word is, by the way, is purple, which is interesting in and of itself, just as a diversion, because I found through a series of links that scholars believe that this scroll might be the scroll of a drug dealer and his transactions in ancient Rome. Because purple was a euphemism for some drugs that were being used at the time. Isn't that wild? That's so.
Wow. So this guy basically dug up this ancient Silk Road.
Yeah. That's a good way to put it. Ross Ulbricht better get on that. Although they'll probably throw him in prison again for that if he went on. Can you imagine? Announcement: Vesuvius Project hires Russ Ulbricht.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, anyway, so that was a diversion. But let's go through USAID, who Mr. Farrader is working for. This is what they found. $50 million to fund the famous condoms in Gaza. 1.5 million to advance DEI in Serbia's workplaces, because you know how the Serbians need more DEI. $70,000 for the production of a DEI musical in Ireland. I was gonna make a lewd Irish joke about shillelagh, but I'm not going to do it. 47,000 on a transgender opera in Colombia.
Whoa.
Yeah. 32,000 for a transgender comic in Peru. What would be can we think of the comic name? Right? What would we call it? Reverso? Transgendero?
So I don't get it. 32,000 to live there or like a
No,
salary?
no, to make a comic in Peru.
Oh, I thought you were saying like a stand-up comedian.
Oh, no. Yeah, to make a comic book. 37 million to the World Health Organization. 16 million for funding institutional contractors and gender development offices. I love this one. This is my favorite. $6 million in non-emergency funding for redundant administrative supports for the, in quote, Center of Excellence.
For what country? America?
All over the world. Let's see. $12 million in support services to the Bureau for Resilience, Environment, and Food Security. And of course, $600,000 to fund technical assistance for family planning in Latin America. Those Latinos are having too many kids. Let's get USAID down there to make sure they, along with those Gazans who keep having kids despite undergoing a genocide against them, well, we can't have more Gazans. That, after all, that's the whole plan, to get rid of Gazans. And it's certainly not to have any more Latin Americans. I guess was this the Biden administration's policy to make sure more Latin Americans don't cross the border? Rather than close the border, just make sure they don't have more Latin Americans?
Just open up more Planned Parenthoods.
Yeah. Well, it's a long-term strategy, but they're going for it.
Right.
So, my commentary, I suppose, on USAID, all these people are freaking out because they're seeing the incredible, just inestimable waste, fraud, abuse that Musk is uncovering with his team, these ingenious programmers, and they're doing the same thing with the reams of government corruption as Faraday was doing with the scalded and burned scrolls from Pompeii. Yeah, uncovering the morass, the criminality. And when the state is your God and God can't err, God can't participate in this corruption. Well, it must be justified then, right? It must be a cause to be defended, this expenditure. In many ways, it makes me laugh because when you speak with progressives, especially very antagonistic, atheistic progressives, they'll say something along the Judas line, right? And that'll be, by the way, I bumped into a quote from Fulton Sheen, um, and he said, Judas was an advocate for social justice. Have you
No,
seen that one?
he said Judas would have been the patron
Oh,
saint.
yes, that's it. Thank you for the correction. Fulton Sheen said Judas would have been the patron saint of social justice. That's spot on, baby. And then it makes me think of when progressive atheists, they lament that we as Catholics or the Orthodox, our Ortho bros, have these magnificent chapels and churches, basilica and cathedrals throughout the world. Well, what a waste. You could have given that to the poor, just like Judas said to the woman who spilled the nard and used your hair to wash the feet of Christ, right? Um, well, this is their church. USAID is a cathedral to them. So when you strike at the edifice, you're striking at their very raison d'etre, their whole worldview. It's an extra. In other words, when I do believe that they are sincere when the Schumers and Pelosi's and the AOC's and the Crockett's and all these morons on the Democratic side, the Chris Murphys, come out, th- they see this as striking at the extravagance of their faith, their religion, the and it's a necessary extravagance to them.
So when you mean you think they're sincere, you're saying that they actually believe that they think it's necessary, or
Well, no, I think it's sort of along the lines of not only do they think it's necessary, but it's it's necessary because one, they won't have. It's part of the beauty of their ideology is that government can do these things.
oh, got it.
You
Okay.
see,
Yeah.
it, government has the capacity to do them, and but and also there's a kind of mystical side of it because it's secret, right? Not no one knows about it, right? But it's being done. It's not unlike the chief priest entering the Holy of Holies only once a year and coming out. You see, what Musk and Doge are doing, and Trump more generally, is that they're throwing the doors open to the sacristy of corruption, and they're defiling it by their presence and arguing that, oh, this is just fraud. This is not real. This is just criminality. It's larceny on a massive scale. They're dispelling the incense.
Right. That's a good metaphor.
The fetid incense, not the good stuff. Speaking about a town that has some fetid incense going around it.
We want to talk about that town?
Let's go for it, Charlie. Here it is.
Meanwhile in Oak Park.
Should we go to your gay suburb now?
The people segment. Meanwhile, Nook Park.
Oh, could I say something before we hop on to Meanwhile? Real quickly. And that is Mike Benz. If you're not following Mike Benz, who's been a commentator upon all this grift and corruption, graft and corruption going on within government, he had a great tweet just yesterday. And he said, when all these revelations about USAID and these just corrupt expenditures going on, he said, I told you, I've been telling all of you for 4 years, we're living in an alternative matrix, in that all of these globalist entities, these NGOs, the Soros Fund, and all these things are creating that none of this is real. There's no organic support for prosecutors that turn a blind eye to open gang warfare or criminality. This is just a matrix. It's all a facade, and it's all being fueled and funded in the most what's the word? Serpentine of ways, underhanded ways. It's not out in the open. So once you take away that, the secretive funding and the surreptitious funding of it all, well, then you're striking at the foundations of this false matrix. So, and he's spot on. He's spot on.
Back to
Sorry.
Meanwhile in Oak Park.
Sorry.
Brought to you by Tridentine Brewing. Get you some TB.
Absolutely.
Let's start here, actually. Exciting news from the Wednesday Journal by Dan Haley.
So read all about it first.
Dear Wednesday Journal readers, in 1980, when my two partners and I launched what would later become the Wednesday Journal's parent company, Growing Community Media, we dreamed of creating a local community newspaper filled with the kind of journalism we wanted to read and that our fellow residents desperately needed. Then, as now, we set out to create a paper that provided rigorous, insightful coverage of local government, helped parents and taxpayers follow events in their local schools, connected readers and business owners to local businesses right here in our own backyard, and showcased the rich stories and strong opinions of the remarkably talented and diverse group of neighbors in the communities we call home. 45 years later, I could not be prouder of all that we have accomplished along the way. As we reach that milestone, I've been reflecting deeply on the future for Growing Community Media and for me personally. Leading this organization has been the joy and privilege of a lifetime, but I've come to believe that the time is right to scale back my day-to-day responsibilities and pass the baton to new leadership. So I'm delighted to announce that, with the support of our board of directors, I will be moving into a new role as senior advisor. This will let me spend a bit more time with my family while also allowing me to continue to support our team as we strive to build a strong, sustainable foundation for GCM's future.
So the title is also known as the Propagandist Emeritus.
My primary focus will be on growing our partnerships in fundraising, and I'll also lead special projects from time to time. Later this spring, the board will be hiring a full-time executive director to lead the organization into its next chapter of growth, service, and impact. The executive director title will replace the publisher title, which better reflects the realities of our not-for-profit organization. Is this a change? Not-for-profit and non-profit?
I did notice that it's not non-profit, it's not-for-profit. Ooh, evil profit.
In the meantime, I'm pleased to announce that Max Reinsdorf will become our interim executive director. Effective immediately, Max will lead every aspect of our effort and work with all of us and our board of directors to sustain and grow this essential nonprofit newsroom. Max has already been with GCM to help us do a deep dive on our business management and operations, so he knows our organization, our team, and our needs. Max brings a passion for community news, having previously worked at both the Tribune and the Better Government Association. He has a sharp focus and deep understanding of digital growth with a healthy respect for the value of print. He has also worked on the philanthropic side of local news. Philanthropic. I know it's philanthropy. Philanthropic side of local news. Importantly, Max is a good listener and knows well our staff's commitment to this work. I could not be more excited for the future. But these are not easy times for local journalism, as you know. Changing habits, new platforms, and evolving business models have taken their toll on far too many local newsrooms around the country. A community news organization is nothing without a community willing to support it as readers, advertisers, subscribers, donors, and champions. You've been essential to our success over these last 45 years, and you're critical to our future too. I look forward to working with our new leadership and with all of you to keep that mission alive and thriving in Oak Park and River Forest. With gratitude, Dan.
Boring. Poor Dan.
Infrastructure costs top River Forest capital plan. $5.3 million budget includes $125,000 for Harlem Avenue Viaduct project. Infrastructure improvements and maintenance headed the list of the 5-year capital improvement plan unveiled at the River Forest Village Board meeting January 27th. In his presentation, Matt Walsh, village administrator, said capital expenditures are estimated to be $33 million over the next 5 years, $5.3 million of which is expected to be spent in the first year, fiscal year 2026, which begins May 1st. Sorry, this is going to be another. It was a brutal week.
Boring.
It was a brutal week. I didn't want to tell you beforehand, but it was a brutal week.
Come on, where are all the
Oak Park
articles
will not
about
assist enforcement of civil federal immigration laws. I don't know
there we
if
go. Let's get
You want to talk about that?
Yeah, sure. Let's get that. I don't care about some sewers.
Despite federal immigration authorities making arrests in Chicago following President Donald Trump's inauguration, Oak Park will not assist in enforcement of civil federal immigration laws, according to a village statement February 4th.
I love these people. They're not going to assist.
The Trump administration has arrested more than 8,000 immigrants nationwide since the inauguration, promising to deport them, according to NBC News. Trump has ordered to turn facilities at Guantanamo Bay Naval Base into an immigration detention center and removed a policy preventing agents from targeting schools, hospitals, and churches. But village officials have stated that they will not use village resources, including staff, to assist. That includes, according to a news release, not inquiring about, recording, or disclosing an individual's immigration status unless required by law.
So basically, they're just doing Olay. Just Toro, Olay.
Right.
Hey.
Every resident, regardless of immigration status, is entitled to access village services without fear of deportation or other immigration-related consequences.
Well, that's
Local
not going to be
officials
true.
stated.
Can I say something weird? Have you noticed that you drive to work every day, right?
Yeah.
Have you noticed that over the past couple weeks, I could be totally off. Traffic is down considerably.
No, I haven't felt that.
No?
I thought you were gonna say something else.
I'm telling you, I am saving 10, 20 minutes on my car rides. It's out of this world. Maybe it's just in the areas in which I'm traveling.
I don't know. But
Okay.
I thought you were gonna say that you think there's less migrants.
Yeah.
I think there are.
And it also points to, so I'm not saying that ICE got all of the illegals out in this area, but they're not out and about as openly, it seems.
Right.
Okay.
In the fall of 2023, Oak Park started providing support to many asylum seekers. For months, many of those families and individuals stayed in village-sponsored shelters. By April 2024, approximately 201 migrants had been resettled into stable housing situations.
Well, here's the thing. let's say ICE and Holman say, well, we need to know the residences that you of these migrants that you put in or that you have records of. Are they going to withhold those records? I couldn't
I would
imagine.
assume they do.
I would assume they try, but I don't think they have any legal standing to do that.
Yeah.
But right.
The release also states that village employees have been reminded to focus on delivering services and support to the public, not inquiring about immigration's status.
Immigration's status.
Yeah, right. I didn't just read that. Quote, the village will continue to uphold the principle of confidentiality for residents
Mm.
and ensure that any personal information shared with the village is not disclosed to federal immigration enforcement agencies, except in cases where disclosure is mandated by law,
Which means nothing. That's such a
village
vacuous
officials said.
statement.
What a
It's like,
joke. What a
yeah,
joke.
I'm not. That's like going to a bar and say, "Hey, buddy, let's go outside and fight." But I'm not gonna fight you if there's a bunch of people outside.
Yeah.
Which is like a weird stipulation that invalidates the previous bravado, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a big disclaimer. No such thing as small government. Oak
Uh-huh.
Park has said it is committed to maintaining a welcoming environment. The village is proud of its values of, I love how they put this in quotes, diversity, equity, inclusion, safety, and respect for all people, and promoting unless mandated by law, and promoting racial equity and social justice is a priority here, officials said. The Illinois Trust Act, adopted in 2017, limits how law enforcement interacts with federal immigration enforcement agencies. It prohibits law enforcement from making arrests or detaining individuals based on immigration status. And on a local level, the Oak Park Board of Trustees designated the village as a, quote, welcoming one by ordinance in 2017. This ordinance codified the practice of the Oak Park Police Department and other village employees of not collecting immigration status of village residents and visitors. Quote, the ordinance makes it clear that immigration is a federal issue and does not involve the village,
Well,
officials
wait,
said.
that's so good. This whole thing is so
Yeah,
self-contradictory.
I'm glad we chose this one instead.
Yeah. I mean, how can you argue that they are going to protect the status of the migrants, but then say they're going to follow federal law and obey federal law?
That's the
Anyway,
segment, people.
there we go. That's Oak Park.
Meanwhile in Oak Park.
What would have happened if I'd gone for it and just said, no, I'm gay? Not much to say about Oak Park.
Mm-mm. Yeah.
Good episode on the tariffs. Good historical episode.
Yeah. 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 Good
How
stuff.
we got to do some more historical stuff. I like the To Kill a Mockingbird type episode. I think we got
Yeah,
some
for
fun
sure.
topics coming up also that we got to talk more about.
We can do
But
that for sure.
if anyone's got any ideas, we got the most listeners we've ever had right now.
Lines are open.
So hit us up.
Lines of communication are open on the website and
Twitter.
comments on YouTube, Odyssey, all very welcome. So,
That's all I got.
all right, cool, Charlie. Thanks.
All right, everyone. Peace out.
Peace.